Welcome back to Indiana at the voice of college football. And Indiana's storybook season comes to a close. At the end of the college football playoff first round game between Indiana and Notre Dame, the Hoosiers fall short. And this game, I think, clearly showcased who the better team was. And I think that Notre Dame, definitely should be really proud of this win, because even though a lot of people are going to say, well, you know what, this isn't a big win for Notre Dame. Notre Dame still doesn't have a big win since the 90s. It might not be as big of a win as those wins they had back with Lou Holtz and some of their previous coaches. If Notre Dame beats Georgia, that would be even way bigger for them to be able to, showcase a lot of the doubters and prove them wrong. But this was still a really big win for Notre Dame. And I picked Notre Dame to win by 10. I had a lot of Indiana fans, upset that I didn't pick Indiana to win this game, didn't back my team. And so far this season, now the season's over, so I can't pick any more Indiana games, but I picked every single Indiana game right this season. I picked them to win 11 games, and I picked against them twice. I picked Ohio State to win, and I picked Notre Dame to win. I did pick Indiana to beat Michigan, and I picked Indiana to win all their other games. So I'm not saying like I just pegged Indiana right from the start. I had them going 7-5 in the preseason. Never expected them to do this well. Still so proud of this season for Indiana. Would have never expected it, and it was just so awesome to see unfold. But once Indiana started, blowing out Nebraska and beating some of these other teams that they faced, Washington, Michigan State the way they did, I mean, it helped me in picking them against Michigan. Like earlier in the year, I would have never picked them against Michigan, even with Michigan's struggles. But I picked IU to beat Michigan. They barely won. But I just couldn't pick them against Notre Dame. I just saw, with Notre Dame being at home, they have most of the crowd on their side, despite a pretty decent turnout from Indiana fans. And the amount of talent Notre Dame has, the three-headed monster they have in the backfield with their two running backs, and even Riley Leonard getting into the action. I couldn't pick Indiana to win. And Notre Dame proved me right and proved to everybody that backed the Fighting Irish. Now, I feel like for this game for IU on the Indiana side, I think it kind of answers some questions both ways for the different beliefs that people have about the Hoosiers. I think that this game showcases to the people that said they didn't belong in the playoffs that were they that far off? Regardless of whether people believe Indiana should have been in the playoffs or not, Indiana won 11 games. They lost one. They're in the Big Ten. You really can't leave them out despite a poor strength of schedule. And teams like Alabama and Ole Miss and Miami blew their chances to get in. If those teams don't drop games against poor opponents, then they're in the playoffs. And Indiana wouldn't have got in, but those teams blew games down the stretch, like Bama to Oklahoma, Ole Miss lost to Florida, Miami choked against Georgia Tech, Syracuse. Those teams would have been in over Indiana and SMU. And we'll see what happens, later with, looking at SMU and some of these other teams. Will, they end up getting blown out? Will SMU get blown out against Penn State? Will Arizona State get blown out when they eventually play? And then that's going to, validate to people saying that these teams don't deserve to be in, that strength of schedule matters more. We heard that discussion tonight. So I think Indiana, for the most part of this game, kind of getting blown out a lot in a lot of parts of this game, really until the fourth quarter, showcases to that side of the discussion for people saying teams like Indiana don't deserve to be in. But then you look at the other argument, and you see how Indiana fought back and kind of, I guess you want to say, made this game interesting at the very end. You got to applaud Indiana's effort for not going down, even though I still don't understand why they punted the ball and didn't try to go for it on fourth down earlier in the fourth quarter. But then after that, play right there, at the end of the game, Indiana really started to get it together and made it somewhat interesting, getting that onside kick, scoring a couple touchdowns, which is great to see. That for some people, Indiana did deserve to be in. It was kind of one of two ways when you look at the fact that were they a team that deserved to be in, were they a team that didn't deserve to be in? I think it's pretty close. They deserve to be in based on their win-loss record and based on what other teams did, losing key games late in the season. But I don't really think this game necessarily really answered the question, yay or nay. Like, it's kind of 50-50. Like I said, we're going to see what's going to happen in some of these other games, whether those teams get blown out too. But, my thing is, and it all goes back to the expansion to 12 teams. You wanted a 12-team playoff. Everybody in the media and other places wanted a 12-team playoff. It's more money, more teams can get in, all that kind of stuff. But You expanded the playoff to 12. You would have never had Indiana in the playoffs if it was still a 14 playoff. You would have never seen Notre Dame in the playoffs if it was a 14 playoff. So, I mean, it's just hard when you have people arguing against Indiana saying they didn't belong, they shouldn't have been in. Alabama with 3 losses should have been in. And even though I can maybe argue in favor of that and say, yeah, Alabama's a better team than Indiana, oh, they should have been in, whatever. They lost 3 games. And the problem is that you're trying to justify a 3-loss Alabama team and 1-loss Indiana team for like a final spot, or SMU as well for that final spot. And this wouldn't have ever been an argument if you had it still as a 14 playoff. So that's where my problems lie with the 12-team playoff system. You're trying to say that Indiana doesn't belong. You're trying to justify Alabama getting in, or Ole Miss, or whatever, South Carolina. And it's like, if you didn't have a 12-team playoff to begin with, none of these teams would have even had a shot to get in. If you left it a 14 playoff, we'd be discussing whether, should Texas have gotten in, or should Texas be in over, maybe a Notre Dame or Penn State, some of these teams at the top, Ohio State, whatever. It would all be between teams like that. It's just, I don't know. I don't still like the 12-team playoff system, but at the end of the day, the 12-team playoff system is what we have. So Indiana got in, and for the most part of this game, they didn't play well. I mean, I feel like Indiana did better than some people probably would think, based on the fact that a couple plays really did change the game. I mean, Curtis Rourke's early pick, I mean, that was a bad throw by Curtis Rourke. He checks that down to the tight end, which they showed multiple times. Sean McDonough and Greg McElroy both showed that if he checks it down to Zach Horton at tight end instead of throwing that bad throw, maybe Indiana scores a touchdown on that drive. We don't know, but that's 7 points right there. And then, Indiana gave up the big run. With Jeremiah Love, 98 yards. That changed the game too. If, it was almost a tackle, was missed tackle, and he's gone. And that play happened. And then just small things. I mean, like you had the penalty where James Carpenter knocked Riley Leonard out of bounds. That ended up being a 15-yard penalty. I don't even agree with that call. I don't think that it was a late hit. He was still in bounds, but they called it anyway. And then you had that other play where the Phasian guy that was a lacrosse player for Notre Dame, he went out there and caught that tough pass on 3rd and 6 that Riley Leonard really did not make a good throw there. Really, the only pass Riley Leonard made all game that was good was that deep throw to Phasian at the end of the game for Notre Dame that got him up to 27 points. That was a fantastic throw. But other than that, he didn't really play all that well. But there was just a lot of small plays that helped Notre Dame build the lead that they did. I mean, Notre Dame did dominate in this game. I'm not going to deny that. But I don't think they completely annihilated them either. I just don't. I think Indiana hung in there for the most part, but I think especially on offense, there was just a lot of errors. And a lot of times where I felt they were too passive. It almost felt like Tom Allen was coaching Indiana for a minute. Like you had that 3rd down and 10 where they run the ball instead of passing, and then they punt. And then, again, you have the 4th down where they punt instead of going for it, even kicking the field goal instead of going for it on 4th down and maybe get a touchdown there. There was a lot of plays that Indiana did wrong that I feel like if they had been maybe more aggressive, maybe they could have, gone out there and done better and made this game way more interesting than it was, or maybe, a couple penalties that went Notre Dame's way, if they weren't called. I mean, it's small things. I'm not going to really even argue the penalty thing because there was a few penalties that they could have called on Indiana that they didn't. I saw several holds. Indiana was basically holding on every play, to be honest, because Notre Dame's D-line was having their way. So, I mean, Indiana just got outmatched on the lines of scrimmage. I mean, we knew that Notre Dame had more talent. I said that. Notre Dame had more talent. Notre Dame, if they could win the lines of scrimmage on both sides, they would win, and I feel like they did that. And that's why I picked Notre Dame to win 31-21. I had Notre Dame winning by 10 points. And, Indiana was getting destroyed, but there was a lot of moments that early in that game, especially the Rourke pick, that play right there really hurt. Because Indiana could have gone up 7-0 if that doesn't happen. He throws that pick, and then the very next play is the Jeremiah Love touchdown. It feels like Indiana never regained their footing after that. If that doesn't happen, we'll never know. We'll never know. It is what it is. But, I mean, like Sports Talk with Austin says, heck of a season, everything to be proud of. I agree. I mean, I've said multiple times this season that I was just excited about, how well Indiana was doing. I never thought I would have seen this good of a season from Indiana. I didn't know Indiana was capable of having this good of a season. And despite the schedule and not having the talent, because that's really what it stems down to. Indiana bringing in all the portal guys that they did, it was fantastic, but they just still do not have the players that these better teams have. I mean, that's ultimately where all the discussion falls when people say, oh, this team doesn't deserve to be in, that team does deserve to be in. Alabama has so much more talent than Indiana. Notre Dame is way more talent than Indiana. Michigan has more talent than Indiana. They had a bad season because they didn't have a quarterback. These teams have more talent. If Indiana had Notre Dame's talent and Notre Dame had Indiana's talent, it'd be the other way around. We'd be saying, oh, well, Indiana's the team that's better. It's just the way that it is. Maybe Indiana can get to that point. I don't know. We'll see in the NIL era. I'm really going to be intrigued to see what Curt Cignetti can do in the future. And I know people are trashing Curt Cignetti for what he says, coming into this game. I get that. I mean, some of the stuff he said was very bullish. We knew that with the I Win Google Me stuff. We heard, all throughout the season how confident he was. Maybe he took it a little too far at times. But, I mean, you got to admire the man's confidence and being able to take a program like Indiana that's never won anything on a high level and did this. Whether they deserve to be in or not, like I said, I've never really advocated and said that they were one of the 12 best teams in the country. You've never heard me say that. But I did say that they deserve to be in because those other teams blew their chance to get in. Alabama, if they do not lose to Oklahoma, gets into the playoffs over Indiana. If Miami does not blow it against Syracuse, they get into the playoffs over Indiana. That's their fault. That's those teams' fault. Like, I'm an Alabama fan. A lot of people know that. And even I was like, they sucked against Oklahoma. I mean, they just blew that game, and they did not deserve to get in. I mean, it is what it is for Alabama. Yes, they're a better team than Indiana, but Indiana won their games. It's not their fault who they played. And I know those people are saying, well, they backed out of the Louisville game. That was before Cignetti got the job. I don't think Cignetti would have backed out of the game. And even still, even if Indiana beats Louisville, does that really change people's opinion that Indiana was a great team? If Indiana beats Louisville, does that really matter? I don't think it matters. Louisville had a pretty good season, I guess, but I mean, outside the Stanford loss, but I don't really think that's going to change people's opinions of Indiana that one game. Just like people said Tennessee, like, oh, Tennessee's non-conference schedule is no good. Well, they played NC State. Like, NC State didn't have that good of a year, and Penn State played West Virginia in the non-conference. People said, oh, they didn't play anybody. Well, West Virginia didn't really have that good of a year either. So, I mean, having a pretty good non-conference opponent that you're assuming is going to be decent, and then they end up not having that good of a year. I mean, if Indiana plays Louisville and beats them, Louisville 7-5. The best team that Indiana beat this year was Michigan, who went 7-5. So I don't understand the narrative with the non-conference thing. Indiana beats Louisville, doesn't really change anything. Yeah, if they lose to Louisville, then they're not in the playoffs, but so would have been if they had lost to Michigan. But I mean, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter whether they deserve to be in or not, because the way it unfolded, you really kind of had to put them in. It was really been hard to justify a 3-loss SEC team over Indiana. SMU is more debatable, but they still put SMU in too. So we'll see what they do tomorrow against Penn State. But at the end of the day, I mean, I was proud of Indiana for at least trying to make this game interesting at the end. I know that, for most people, that this game, again, proves that they didn't belong. But at the end of the day, I was just happy to see Indiana here. They're never here. I never would have thought they'd have been here. And I know that making a 12-team playoff is not as big of a deal. But like I said, they didn't have to expand it. They did that because of money. But I thought Indiana made a lot of mistakes. I thought that a lot of the mistakes that they made, against Ohio State kind of cropped up again. A lot of bad punting from James Evans again. I don't know why he was still rattled, but is what it is. Indiana made a lot of mistakes, but when you're the lesser talented team, you have to do a whole lot better, than the other team to win. And I felt like Notre Dame played about a B- game. B-, C+, a little bit harsh. I think it was at least a B- because they did a good job on the lines of scrimmage. And besides Leonard's turnover, that was tipped. It wasn't even all his fault. I mean, they were solid. But it wasn't a perfect game from them. I mean, they weren't, great. There was, some bad throws from Leonard, like throws that if he completes them better, like that they're not low to the ground, maybe Notre Dame's receivers can take off more. But I felt like there was more moments where Notre Dame could have pushed the lead out further, just like I felt there were moments Indiana could have done to keep it closer. But, I mean, Indiana needed to play an A game to win, and they played about a C. minus. I mean, I thought the defense was pretty good. Everybody was talking about how Indiana let Notre Dame run all over them. If you take out Jeremiah Love's big run, Notre Dame only ran for like 90 yards. It was that one run. I mean, other than that, I mean, Indiana did contain Leonard pretty well, did contain the backs pretty well outside of that one run. That one run changed the game, though, right after that pick. I mean, it's just things like that. So, I mean, Notre Dame, the more talented team, they were at home, had the crowd. They got it done. You know, happy for Will, my buddy Will, and his Fighting Irish. They did a good job. Going to have to play better, though, if they want to beat Georgia. They can do it. They can beat Georgia. Georgia is more vulnerable this year than they used to be. So I definitely could see Notre Dame beating Georgia. It possibly. I'm not picking that. I'm definitely going to, when me and Will, do our show, we're definitely going to, make our picks on that game. It's going to be interesting to see. I'm going to have to really look at both teams because, I mean, Georgia, very talented, but they've have some injuries going on and stuff like that. It's going to be interesting. But happy for Notre Dame. Played a good game, and Indiana, it stinks that their storybook season is over. But like I said, at the beginning of the season, would have never thought that this was possible. And hopefully in the future, Indiana can, maybe have another year like this. Maybe they can go out there and have another storybook season, and maybe they can be decent and good enough in the future where this won't be a storybook year. This won't be like a one-hit wonder. Maybe they can do that. I know it's going to be hard. They're going to have to recruit at a higher level, but they're really committing. Really proud of their commitment to football because, yeah, they lost quarterback coach Tino Sunseri to UCLA, but other than that, they're keeping all their coordinators. They're paying them a lot of money, a lot more than any coordinators that have ever been paid in Indiana history. Signetti's got the contract extension. I know Signetti said a lot of things that have turned people off. I mean, if he had won this game, people would have been fine with him. But since, he's made bold comments and they lose this game, oh, now he sucks. But, one thing I give the man is he's confident. And if they start going 4-8 and he keeps saying stuff like that, then yeah, I can understand. If they go 7-5, 8-4 better next year, then I'll be satisfied with that. I mean, Indiana in the past usually goes 4-8, 5-7, so that would be fantastic. But time will tell with that. But definitely appreciate everybody for being here. Godfather of the SEC said I was shocked. Me too. Honestly, I thought Indiana would learn from the mistakes of the Ohio State game and do better. But, I mean, just made a lot of mistakes still. Got to clean up the mistakes. You want to win, and you want to win against a really good team. You can't have mistakes, and Indiana definitely made way too many mistakes. And we got Jamie Howard here as well. So do we see how important Drew Evans was to Indiana ever since he went down for Michigan High? He's never the same. Yeah, I mean, Indiana's offensive line was a whole lot better this year. Bob Bostad's a really good offensive line coach. But, I mean, losing Nick Kidwell before the year, we don't know how good he would have been. And then Drew Evans going down. I mean, as people said the same thing with Ohio State. Like, Ohio State was better with the O-line before that, has hurt their team somewhat. Well, it's the same thing. Any team, you lose a good key offensive lineman, it hurts. And I do feel like Indiana's offensive line was worse with Tyler Stevens in there, a guy that really wasn't even an offensive lineman. He's more of a tight end, but it is what it is. As Drew Evans went down, injuries are part of the game. You have to have depth, and that's something that maybe in the future Signetti will be able to hopefully achieve in Indiana, is maybe get some more depth, because you have to have depth to win in college football. You have to have star players, and Indiana had some really good players at the top. But behind them, that's where it really hurts. Why you saw in a lot of games that they would get worn down toward the end, like in the Michigan game and Ohio State, Notre Dame as well. But definitely is what it is. But we'll always, no matter what happens in the future, be proud of this Indiana team. It's the best team I've ever seen in my life from Indiana. And it definitely shows that it is possible to win anywhere. And hopefully Indiana can, keep on winning in the future. We got a comment saying, does this mean the Indiana channel will be canceled? No, the Indiana channel is not going to be canceled. Definitely going to be talking about the Hoosiers in the future. Maybe have some basketball coverage as well, even though they're not doing too good. But maybe, something can get turned around with that. But I think bright things are still on the horizon for Indiana football. Maybe not the heights of this, but you never know. The Indiana Showcase was possible this year, and definitely excited to see what happens for Indiana football in the future. But thanks to everybody for being here. Like the stream down below. Subscribe to the Indiana channel. If you are new, definitely going to have more Hoosier content on the way. Got to, recap this season and talk about, some more portal news, and the off-season news is going to be starting to come down the pike as, we get ready for the 2025 season months down the road. A lot of stuff to talk about with that, but definitely going to be recapping this season for a while. A lot of stuff to talk about and unpack as Indiana keeps trending and seemingly in the right direction. Hopefully that can continue to happen. But definitely appreciate everybody for being here. Share the stream out to other Indiana fans. Get them coming in here. Got to keep, the Hoosier train rolling, even with the setback. Definitely Indiana's in a lot better place than they've been for a long time. I mean, Indiana hasn't done anything really since 1967, so it's just definitely, with that Rose Bowl game, even though they didn't win against O.J. Simpson. It's a rare thing, but fantastic year for Indiana. So proud of them, and congratulations again to Notre Dame. Really solid game that they played, but definitely appreciate everybody for being here. And despite the loss, what an epic season for the Hoosiers. Go Hoosiers, everybody.